What does it take to have perfect aim in Rainbow Six Siege? That is what I set out to answer today. So I watched 23 aim guides totaling upwards of 4 hours worth of content to create the ultimate aim guide for Rainbow Six Siege. This video will be taking all the information I learned from those countless hours of content and compressing it down into a format you can easily digest. A link to the playlist of all the videos and links to each creator's channels I watched will be down in the description. Now let's go ahead and get into the video. Now, one of the things that I took away from these videos that many people sleep on is their actual posturing and positioning in real life. For example, something that Kovaaks, Kimmy, and Rambo Kim pointed out in their videos was to make for sure your mouse grip is optimal. You want to make for sure that your wrist is on your desk and that you don't let your wrist hover off the desk, because for your wrist to hover off the desk, it requires you to use additional muscles that can no longer contribute to the aiming process, and it will cause you to have significantly worse aim because of that. So you want to let your wrist rest on your table while you're moving your mouse, and you want to let it drag across your mouse pad. Additionally, you want to figure out whether you're more comfortable aiming mostly with your wrist or your arm. If you're more comfortable aiming with your wrist, then you want to have a higher sensitivity so that way you can aim with your wrist effectively. And if you're more comfortable aiming with your full arm, then you need to lower your sensitivity so that way you can take advantage of the fact that you're moving your arm across your entire mouse pad. Another posture thing that a lot of people forget in real life is to make for sure that your table and chair are positioned in a way that your arm is at 90 degrees. You want your arm to always be at a 90-degree angle while you're playing in game, because it's the most comfortable position for your arm and it will give you the most optimal angle to move your mouse. If your chair is too low to your desk, then your arm is going to be going off the desk, which is going to increase friction on your arm, making it harder for you to aim. And if your arm is too high off the desk, it's going to cause more muscles to be activated in your arm, which is going to once again make it harder for you to aim accurately. So you want to find that perfect middle ground where your table and your chair are at the perfect height to allow your arm to be at a 90-degree angle. And after all that, you're also going to want to make for sure that you have a big enough mouse pad on your desk to where you can actually aim effectively. A lot of players play on a really small mouse pad that's barely bigger than their mouse, and if you're playing on that, you're going to be at a significant disadvantage because you're not going to be able to use the full length of your desk to aim. So if you don't have a big mouse pad, try to buy one. You can get a full desk mouse pad for like 30 bucks online if you look hard enough, and it will definitely help your aim a lot in the long run. And yeah, anyways, now that we've gotten all that out of the way and your physical setup is actually right, now we can actually go in game and start focusing on how you can improve your aim with in-game settings. So what you're going to want to do as soon as you load up into the game is change your crosshair to a different color that doesn't blend into the surrounding. So that can include the default crosshair color, the green crosshair color, or the red crosshair color. A lot of players will change their crosshair color to something like white, which will blend in heavily with the surroundings and make it a lot harder for you to see enemies on certain positions. So you're going to want to make for sure that you stick to those 3 colors on your crosshair, so that way your crosshair doesn't blend in too much while you're aiming. This is something that Alka pointed out in his aim guide, and that I've also pointed out in my previous aim guides before, that I think is extremely important. Another thing that's extremely important that a lot of people look over is making for sure that you have an FOV between 80 to 85. A lot of players, because they're used to playing like this in other games, will crank their FOV up to the maximum FOV possible in Siege, but that's actually bad because it makes enemies look smaller on your screen. If you have a FOV between 80 to 85, it will allow enemies to look a lot bigger on your screen, making it easier for you to hit your shots. It will decrease your peripheral vision a slight amount, but that slight amount is worth it for making enemies look bigger on your screen. And once we've got that out of the way, it's now time for you to pick your sensitivity. The way I recommend you discovering a sensitivity is by going into the shooting range, doubling your sensitivity or dividing it in half, so that way your mental is reset and you're no longer attached to that previous sensitivity, and then slowly adjusting it up or down until you find that perfect sweet spot. Typically, if you're someone that aims with your arm, like I mentioned earlier, you're going to want to have a lower sensitivity, and if you're someone who aims with your wrist a whole lot, you're going to want to have a higher sensitivity, because if you aim only or mostly with your wrist, it's going to be a lot harder for you to make really wide, large movements. So you're going to want that sensitivity a little bit higher. Whereas if you're aiming with your arm, it's pretty easy for you to make wide sweeping movements. So you want to lower your sensitivity so that way you can have more precision. But you're just going to want to go into the shooting range, start a random drill, and just start training and lowering and upping the sensitivity until you find that perfect sweet spot where you're not over flicking too much or under flicking too much, and you're not having a hard time tracking opponents. And something that was echoed in pretty much every video I watch is the importance of practicing daily. You want to create a shooting range routine that takes somewhere between 5 to 15 minutes that you can do every single day, so that way you can make for sure that your aim is still on point, and so that way you can improve over time. And typically the way you're going to want this routine to go is you're going to want to start off by practicing your flicks using these settings on screen right now, and you're just going to flick between targets as fast as you can, so that way you can just warm up your speed really quickly. And then as the drill progresses, you're going to want to warm up your accuracy more and more. You can do this by halfway through the drill changing to these settings here, and then just trying to shoot the super small targets. Don't focus on speed, Focus on accurately hitting your shots. Well, that's your goal with this drill. It'll warm up your precise movements and it will make sure your precision is properly warmed up. If you do these two things every day, not only will it prepare you for your ranked session, but if you don't end up playing Siege at all for the day and you just do this training, it'll also make for sure that you're slowly improving over time, because the more time you get on your sensitivity and the more time you spend in the shooting range, the better you're going to get. Now, something that was pointed out in OhBee and Ricci's video that I think is really important is to use the first lane of the shooting range to practice recoil patterns. What you're going to want to do is pick operators that you typically play in your matches a lot. Let's say Buck is one of your favorite operators. You're going to want to pick Buck, go into the shooting range, and then just pull the trigger and let the recoil go in the direction it normally goes. You can then watch the trajectory of the recoil and then pull down your mouse in the direction the recoil is going. So let's say your gun pulls up and to the right. You're going to want to pull your mouse down and to the left to counter the recoil. If you go into the shooting range and do this with all the guns you normally use, you'll very quickly start to realize how hard you need to pull down your mouse and in what direction while using those guns, and it'll eventually just become muscle memory to you. Now, another thing that you can do in the shooting range to improve your strafing and your ability to hit targets while moving is to go into lane 2 and strafe back and forth while trying to hit the target. This will make for sure that you're good at hitting targets while moving, and it'll help you warm up your strafing capabilities as well. Now, if you have bad crosshair placement, a good way to practice this is to go into a custom game, place a barricade down, destroy it, and then look at the second belt buckle. That belt buckle is basically head level, so you can walk around a map aiming at that level and be absolutely certain that you're always aiming head height. Another way to practice good crosshair placement is to take advantage of Siege's new training drills. These training drills will put dummies around a map at common areas where enemies play at, and they will also be at varying levels like crouch and standing height, so you can walk around the map and kill these dummies to practice your crosshair placement. Now, while we're on the topic of discussing training, something that I think is extremely important to stress is to not waste time with outside aim trainers. A lot of players will spend a ton of time in things like aim labs or Kovaaks to train their aim. You don't need to bother with this because these applications are not the actual environment you're playing in. You need to make for sure you're just focusing on the shooting range and training drills, because those are going to be the best way to practice since you're in the actual environment of Siege, and since you'll be using actual guns from Siege and the actual physics and movement mechanics of Siege. And now that we've gotten all the training out of the way, now we can discuss actual tips that you can implement in game to help your aim as well. One of the biggest tips that I've learned from playing Siege over time, and something that I've pointed out in multiple videos before, is to make for sure you're ADSing in almost every situation. When you enter the building, you want to be ADS for 90% of the time because it will prevent you from getting caught off guard by the defenders. A lot of the time, players make the mistake of just sprinting around the map or walking around un-ADS, and then they get caught off guard by a defender they didn't expect to be there, and they die to them because they don't have time to ADS. If you ADS while walking around the map and into areas where you expect enemies to be, you won't get caught off guard by a defender and you'll be ready to take a gunfight. And another important tip to take to heart is to not shoot at an opponent before you have a clear shot. You'll see this a lot with newer players. They get really nervous or they panic when they see an opponent on their screen and they just shoot whether they have a clear shot or not. If you can barely see a portion of an enemy or you're not exactly confident in your ability to hit the shot, wait until you get closer or wait until the enemy moves so that way you can get a more effective shot onto them. Because if you shoot an opponent before you have a clear shot, a lot of times it will give them time to react and they'll be able to kill you before you can kill them. Another mistake that a lot of new players make is holding angles too tightly. They'll sit on a door frame and give themselves a tight pixel peak that they can't really react to. Most of you watching this video are not going to have fast enough reaction times to kill someone off of that tight of an angle. You should instead position your crosshair slightly farther away from the angle, so that way when an enemy peeks the doorway, they'll be walking into your crosshair instead of you having to flick onto them. Now, something that goes hand in hand with holding an angle too tightly is holding an angle too closely to a doorway. If you don't know, holding an angle super up close to a doorway or a wall will give the enemy that you're going against extreme peeker's advantage, because they're going to see you way before you see them. This is why when you're holding an angle, you want to be as far away from the doorway or wall that you're holding the angle on as possible, because it will prevent the enemy from seeing your legs or your arms before you can see them, and it will give you a more fair shot at taking a gunfight against them. The only time you want to be up close to a wall when taking a fight on an opponent is if you plan on swinging out, because if you play close to the wall and then swing out, it's going to appear like you're moving faster to the opponent than if you are farther away from the angle. So only play close to a doorway if you plan on swinging out. Don't play close to the doorway if you're just going to hold an angle on it. Now, if you are going to swing into a room, something that you need to be doing is clearing angles one at a time. You want to peek into a doorway and check every common angle one at a time, so that way you don't get caught off guard by an opponent. If you just wide swing a doorway without actually checking each angle one by one, it not only allows an enemy to catch you off guard by being in a position you didn't expect, but it also opens you up to getting shot by multiple enemies at once. This is why you see really good players at higher ranks peeking into a room slowly but surely instead of just wide swinging out of it, because it allows them to check each common angle one at a time without leaving themselves vulnerable to multiple of those angles. Another thing that you can use to your advantage when you're peeking into a room or a doorway is to take advantage of quick peeks to gather information. Doing quick peeks like the Shiko peek or just a normal quick peek allows you to gather information on where the enemies are in a room, and it also allows you to bait them into pre-firing you and wasting ammunition. And then once you get the info from quick peeking, you can then swing out on the opponent and take an advantageous gunfight against them. This is something that pretty much every creator points out in their aim guide videos, and I think it's something that you should start taking advantage of. Learning how to Shiko peek or even just using basic quick peeks can be a huge skill in your arsenal to help you take gunfights with information. Speaking of taking gunfights with information, something that you should always avoid doing is taking gunfights without information. If you have access to a drone, always try to drone into a room before you enter it, so that way you're not getting caught off guard by a defender. And if you don't have drones, try to take advantage of quick peeks that I mentioned earlier to gather information for yourself. If you take this philosophy into every match and into every gunfight you take, you'll notice that you start winning more gunfights. A lot of players will walk into a room without any information, and then they have to rely on their ability to flick onto an opponent when they inevitably get swung by one. And relying on your ability to flick is not the way you should be going about taking gunfights. You should always try to have as much information as you possibly can whenever taking a gunfight in Siege. Speaking of taking advantage of information, something you should get in the habit of is using sound and other forms of information like drones to pre-fire your opponents. If you hear an opponent or you just know where they are because you have a drone on them or something, you should always try to pre-fire them because it will give you a massive advantage in a gunfight. Because if an enemy doesn't know you're there and you pre-fire them, they're gonna have very little time to react, and you're gonna have a massive upper hand on them in a gunfight. And something to help your pre-fires be more consistent that Fett pointed out in his aim guide is to pre-fire at random intervals to get an opponent to swing into your pre-fire. And the way you do this is to make your sprays consistent at the start of your pre-fire and then take a long pause before dumping the rest of your magazine. If you do this, the enemy will see that long pause that you took and assume that you're reloading, and then they'll go to swing out on you. And then once they go to swing out on you, you'll already be dumping your magazine and you'll get a free kill. This is something that pro players use all the time to their advantage, and trust me, it'll help you out a ton in rank. Something else to help you in gunfights when you're swinging into an opponent is to crouch peek the opponent. The reason why crouch peeking is so strong in Siege is because if an enemy is aiming at head level and you crouch peek them, it's going to throw off their crosshair placement significantly, because now they're going to be aiming way above you and they're going to have to flick onto your head. This can be extremely strong against really high ranked opponents because a lot of them have perfect crosshair placement to the head. And so if you crouch peek them, you'll have an upper hand in the gunfight, because for the first little bit of the gunfight, they won't even be aiming at you. And the last and probably the most important thing I took away from pretty much every video that I watched is that your mentality plays a big role in your aim. In Siege, you don't want to be playing for kills and you don't want to let bad performance bother you. If you build these habits, it's going to cause you to play worse, because gunfight skill in Siege is 60% your mechanics and about another 40% mental. If every time you load into a ranked match, you're worried about your performance and you're trying to play for kills and nothing else, you're not only going to be losing the game because you're not going to be playing the objective or really focused on helping your team in any way, but you're also likely not going to win any gunfights because you're constantly worried in the back of your head about performing poorly. Realistically, all you need to win more gunfights in Siege is to just have confidence in yourself and always be prepared for a gunfight to come your way. As long as you're confident in your abilities and you just focus on trying to win the round, you're going to be putting yourself on the right track. Don't worry about your KD, don't worry about getting kills, just have confidence in yourself and focus on the round at hand. Anyways, that's going to wrap up today's video. Hopefully I was able to help you better your aim in Rainbow Six Siege. If you have any other tips for players, make sure you leave them in the comments down below. If you found this video useful, I make Siege content just like this twice a week, so go subscribe to the channel and follow me on Twitter if you don't miss the next upload. Also, make sure to check out all the other creators and their videos I watched in the description below. This video would not be possible without them. Now, if you want to watch another video just like this one, a video will be popping out on your screen right now that I'm sure you all enjoyed. I'll see you next time, friends, and peace.